Hi, this is Rod Fleming in the Philippines. I hope you're all well. Today we're going to talk about the Bini Boys of Bugis Street. Before we get there, please do remember that we actually do need your money. So go on one of the sites. That's one of my Patreon sites or my own website. One of these places. There's a whole bunch of lists of things there. You can buy me a coffee. You can all sorts of things just so you can help a little bit. All right, please do this. We need it. Leaving that to one side for a moment, we need to go to the Bini Boys of Bugis Street. Now, some of you might remember that I discussed Bini Boys before, and they're called Bini Baes here in the Philippines. And basically, they're ladyboys. It's just a different terminology for the same thing. In Singapore, the situation was a little different. Let's start by talking a little bit about how this all came about. Singapore has a canal or a river running right through the middle of it. And there is a group of people called the Bugis, and I've discussed the Bugis before, not great lengths, but they're interesting. And they're a seafaring people. They largely live on boats. I mean, some live on land, and they live more on the land now, but traditionally they lived on boats. They were fishermen, they were traders, very, very keen traders. Some were probably pirates, but you know how people are like. Land-based people never ever trust seafaring people, so there was probably a fair bit of smear and innuendo going on. But they're called Bugis, and they're still there. Now, they used to tie up their boats in this area in the centre of old Singapore, on the river there. And when that part of the river was bridged over and made into built over, and there was a street there, that street was called Bugis Street because of the Bugis people. So there you have, the Bugis people gave their name to this street in old Singapore. And anybody, who was a traveller in the East, who's of my age, would definitely know about Bugis Street. I mean, really, 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 you would know about it. Singapore was occupied by the Japanese during World War II. And as they were everywhere, they were horrifically brutal. But eventually, thankfully, they were kicked out, and the world at least was spared that amongst its list of miseries. I mean, now we have to put up with the Americans. Out the frying pan, into the fire, eh, boys? Anyway, Singapore, at that time, and still today, but at that time particularly, was a massive, massive port. We're talking about an era before containerization, and yet at the same time, the world was rebuilding after World War II, so there was an enormous amount of trade. There's a huge boom in global trade that happens after World War II, simply because, so many places had been destroyed. They had to be rebuilt, and you need materials, and you need food for workers, and you need all of these things. So there was a massive, massive explosion in international trade, and as a result, Singapore became incredibly busy and wealthy. And wherever you get ships, you get what? What do you get when you get ships? Sailors. And you ought to know what sailors are like. So anyway, you have all these matelots who, after their time on board ship, being matelots, get the time on shore to really, really rip it up, because that's what they do. Sailors are never famous for saving their money. They were famous for working hard on the ship and then blowing it all in 2 days. That's basically what famous sailors are really famous for doing. So they would go, when they went to places like Singapore, and Singapore definitely was the biggest of these in Southeast Asia. Bangkok, Manila, they just weren't as important in terms of this the sex trade. In those days, Singapore was just bigger, and there were more ships, more matelots, more girls. So, amongst these girls, would it surprise you to know, given the channel you're watching, that some of these girls were not actually female? Yes, it was that thing that the feminists can't stand. They were male women. They were Bini Boys. And some of them were really stunning. I'm going to put up some pictures in this video so that you can see. If I can get a little bit of video clip, I'll put that into. Some of these girls were just like, wow. Jeepers, creepers. Japanese destroyed everything wherever they went. They were an awful. I mean, I'm not saying Japanese now, they changed, we hope. But at that time, they were appalling. Singapore had to be rebuilt after World War II. And all these ships were coming in and they were bringing their sailors, and their sailors had lots of money to spend, so you get girls really happy to take that money off them and, you know, provide sexual services for it. And amongst these girls were the bini boys. Now, this area of Bugis Street became really famous as the red light area. And in fact, one of the attractions of the area was what was called the Dance of the Flaming Arseholes. And this was, yeah, I mean, guys are quite something sometimes. This was a situation where sailors, usually men, apparently often Australians, which kind of figures, would strip naked and climb onto a low building that was on one side of this little square in Bugis Street. And they would, on the roof there, they would be naked and they would set fire to their own farts, right? You know, big sheets of flame. I'm just sorry, you know, guys do strange things. We do. You know, I've been at parties where people were doing that. In fact, I was at a party once where a guy, this unbelievably hairy guy, called Big Sam, actually set himself on fire because his hair caught fire doing this. Anyway, that's an aside. This was one of the attractions of Bugis Street, but the main attraction were the girls. There were a lot of female prostitutes, but what the place really was famous was the bini boys. Because, you know, this was... I think you have to understand that for... you know, Americans have a very, very weird view of the world. It's extremely strange. You have to understand that for a lot of guys, trans women are this exotic fruit. It's like, oh, you have a what? Now that's interesting. Can I see it? Go to play with it. And you like, how do I know? Would you do it that way? In the bum? Well, you know, one thing about sailors is they have a little bit of a reputation for being familiar with bum sex. And so I don't think they were particularly troubled by the fact that the most beautiful girls in Bugis Street were wearing cocks. I just don't think that bothered them at all. It was like, so what? You know, just get your legs in the air, we don't care. Who knows what went on in the darkened hotel rooms surrounding Bugis Street in the 60s, 70s and 80s. And it went on for a very long time. Bugis Street was absolutely famous, internationally famous. They actually made movies about it. And it was only in the mid-90s when the city authorities, of course, decided that we're going to clean up the act. That's always a disaster. Whenever people do that, they just ruin everything. You know, it's like when women take over. It's like, you know, it used to be good fun here. It's not good fun anymore, and that's because of you bloody women. You destroyed it. Anyway, I'm going to cut into some of the images that I found of the bini boys of Bugis Street. I'm presuming I have Singaporean friends, and I will ask them. There's loads and loads of ladyboys in Singapore, by the way. Absolutely loads. I don't know where they go now. They probably hang around in the various discos and nightclubs. And I don't think there is a specific place like Bugis Street anymore. Because, you know, the city authorities were, oh, can't have that. Sex? What, sex? In our town? Oh, what? Get out the burning brands. Get out the pitchforks. Quickly, we can't have this sort of thing. That's how these fucking do-gooding wastes of space behave. It's how they always behave, you know. Every time a woman gets into a position of power, she buggers it up. They never stop. Anyway, that was Bugis Street. And it must have been fantastic. You know, the images that we have, and you see these girls, and they're so glamorous, you know. I mean, it's like here. The most glamorous girls in Walking Street. There's not that many, actually, ladyboys parade in Walking Street. But the most glamorous girls in Walking Street are all ladyboys. And when you go to places like, well, Pattaya or Phuket, where it's absolutely full of them, I mean, you can tell it's a ladyboy you're looking at because she looks better than the girls. It's as simple as that. She's just sexier. She's just eye-catching. Just like head-turning. Just like, wow, look at that one. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. That one's wearing a dick. there is something about trans women, excuse my monster here, there's something about trans women that I think it's actually quite hard for women to replicate. I think that there's something about that, the way that trans women just are, that they lend themselves to these incredible expressions of beauty. You know, I was involved in sorry, the table's moving. It's not me, I'm not drunk. We're not on a boat, it's not moving, it's this fucking table. I was involved in a conversation, what you might call it, a conversation on Twitter, you know. And occasionally I quite like to needle the feminists because I hate them. I absolutely loathe feminists. I look at the amount of damage they've done, the harm they've done, particularly to women, by the way, and I can do nothing but detest them. So it's quite nice to needle them from time to time, you know. You fuckers, take that. And this particular one was because some idiot had said, I mean, you're given the appearance of trans women, horrific, like Shrek, you know, with the legs and all the rest of it. So I slipped in a couple of pictures of some absolute babes that I know, you know, and you know, I happen to know that they're still wearing their dicks. And they're totally gorgeous. I mean, it's like, yahoo. These girls are so beautiful. I mean, how can you be that beautiful and be male? And of course, the next thing, the TERFs, the GCs, and sundry other feminist scum are running around with like headless chickens, you know. Oh, bad man, bad man, bad man, bad man. You know, it's absolutely hilarious, and I love doing it. I know it's childish. I know it's childish. It's really childish of me, but I love it. It just, and these people are so bloody po-faced. They are so entitled. They're so assuming that, you know, bursting their balloon is wow, such a pleasure. It's lovely. Anyway, in the early days of Bugis Street, the girls wouldn't have had, you know, hormones, because in this context, hormones nearly always mean contraceptive pills, and none of that happened until 1960. Singapore was fairly early into this fray because it was a very loose society. People didn't care. It was not like Manila, where it took, the Philippines, where it took some time for the authorities to permit the sale of these contraceptives. But in Singapore, that happened fairly early, so the girls immediately started taking them. And of course, then you move from the kind of, really from the bini boys, which in Manila and in this early part of this in Singapore, they weren't taking hormones, so they were very, very young. You know, they really were boys dressed as girls, because at that age they still have the look. You know, they're easy to feminize. Trust me, it's extremely easy to feminize a 14-year-old Asian boy, and he will be mega passing. But of course, hormones actually meant they could stay in the business much longer, you know, well into their 30s, because the hormones just arrest all the masculinization. That's it. They stop, and they remain with those extremely girly bodies and those extremely girly faces, and they don't change. They're just like that because they're taking, you know, in the combination pill, which then would have been the really big game changer one was Diane 35, which is a combination pill. It contains an anti-androgen and a chemical estrogen, which really has powerful effects on feminization, but also arrests masculinization, drop dead like that. It doesn't happen anymore. That's why ladyboys can be so beautiful. They start taking hormones when they're 12. They don't do any they don't have a masculine puberty. Unfortunately, just as the bini boys were really sort of flowering into full ladyboys and the absolute, the pearls of the Orient, the treasures of the East, these fantastic girls who just look so good, and actually who are just so good, city authorities, as usual, fucked it all up. And so they left. The bini boys just, I think there are still many bini boys there, but it's not public like it was then. It wasn't in your face. But, you know, if you want that kind of action, you go to Bangkok. Go to Bangkok or Phuket or Pattaya. These are the places where, I mean, there are huge bar complexes that, you know, and there's just wall-to-wall ladyboys. In some of these bars, nothing else to them but ladyboys and men. And they're like heaven. It's like walking into heaven. You know, and I can imagine what Bugis Street was like, because I've been in some of these places, and it's like, wow, you know. I mean, I'm no great shakes to look at, but, you know, as long as I've got a buck in my pocket, I will have the most beautiful women on earth draped all over me within seconds of my arrival in a place like that. It's like, I remember one guy saying, you know, and I was very naive then, and I'm sure Bugis Street was like this, and he said, you know, you're going to a particular bar, I think it was called Cascades, I can't really remember, but he said, you know, within 2 minutes you will have a cock in each hand and somebody will have their hand on your cock. And I was like, oh yeah, fine. Ho, 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 ho. He was right. He was absolutely right. Seconds after sitting down, somebody slipped their hand in my pants. I'm like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, you could make a fuss, or you could go, okay, mind the nails, darling. And that's about the length of it. And she's busy taking your hand and putting it down her front. What you have to understand is that all of this is like a paradise. It's wonderful, you know. And when we look over and we look at what the West has become, what a miserable hole it's become, a horrible place, you know, where people are constantly fucked up, and nobody's allowed to have any fun anymore. I mean, you're not even allowed to buy a proper car anymore. You can't even have a wood-burning stove in your house. You know, I used to like wood-burning stove. Fun. Not allowed anymore. In the West, the women, the feminists, and the greenists have totally destroyed everything. Absolutely everything. And unless you Westerners, people who stay in the West, are prepared to take action to destroy them in return, and I think it will get very nasty, then consign yourself, you know, you're going to be slaves for the rest of your lives. Helots. And the only place, well, there are places, you know, you can go to Latin America, certain parts of Southern Europe, but Southeast Asia is just great. It's just fantastic. If you're a guy, this is just the best place on the planet to be. And that's why when I do stories like the bini boys of Bugis Street, and you think back to those times, it's not like the West, you know, where all the good stuff's been taken away permanently. All that happens in Southeast Asia is they move somewhere else. They're just not going to be shoved out of the way. If the Thai authorities were ever mad enough to try to close down the ladyboy sex trade in Thailand, they'd just go to the Philippines. Or somewhere else. You know, there's plenty of places they can go, and the men will follow. We will always follow. Because there's that allure, you know. If you're a man who loves life, and you love women, and you love everything that's good in the world, and you're not prepared to put up with the bullshit any longer, get yourself to Asia. I have to go now because the noise is building up again, and I'm getting annoyed. See you later. So anyway, that's the bini boys of Bugis Street. Wonderful. Wonderful. Fantastic. You know, it's kind of one of these things, you know, like, God, why can't I have 200 years of life so I could try it all? See you later. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.